Thank you very much, Dennis. I'm afraid I tend to make things more complicated rather than simple, but we'll see what we can do. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and I wasn't going to miss it for anything. Thank you to Joe. And my apologies to everyone for being late, and apologies to the panellists as well. Sitting in Heathrow Airport at nigh on 4 o'clock this afternoon, sending slightly frantic texts to Joe, complaining about Aer Lingus delays. I confess I wished, forget about north-south, east-west relations should be closer. I just wish Britain and Ireland were a little bit closer at that time. But anyway, I made it. I'm very honoured to be here representing the Centre for Cross-Border Studies as a member of its board. Many of you will remember Andy Pollock, who founded the centre in '99 and led it until his active retirement about 4 years ago when Ruth Tyon took over as director. Some of you too may recall Andy's regular note from the next door neighbours, in which Andy used his journalistic skills to pen an open monthly letter on the subject of cross-border relations. It was typically engaging and forthright. Andy's passion for cross-border cooperation did not blind him to the myriad problems and inadequacies that saw opportunities for mutual benefit missed time after time. The journey time on the Enterprise train was a particular bugbear of his. His last such letter in June 2013 outlined some of the many successes of the centre, bearing plaudits from far afield and from leaders of all political hues. It also bemoaned the sectors most stubbornly uninterested in cross-border affairs, among whom he most forcefully criticised the media, and I'm ashamed to say, with some justice, the universities. Andy viewed this lack of interest as boding gravely ill for the future. He warned none of this would matter if North-South cooperation remained high on the agenda of the responsible governments, but it doesn't. Necessary North-Southery has almost disappeared off the map. He continued, all this is worrying. Without the active interest and involvement of both the British and Irish governments, the two main parties in Northern Ireland will go back into the tribal silos where they feel most comfortable. The world will forget about this insignificant and awkward province, and in another generation, the malign cycle of sectarianism and violence will be in danger of raising its ugly head again. This was 2013, the time at which I came onto the board of CCBS, and our experience since, with some notable exceptions, has been almost consistently one of an uphill struggle. This struggle could have been possibly interpreted as a sign of success. Peace felt normal, cross-border contact unremarkable. It was easy to blithely slip into complacency. That conditions could descend into the malign cycle about which Andy warned was happily quite inconceivable. But within a few short years, the same complacency about the peace, about power sharing, about cross-border cooperation, about even EU membership, has allowed the unthinkable to happen. Such things that we have cherished, and indeed brandished around the world as a sign of success, have become playthings, tossed lightly up in the air in acts of outrageous political hubris. One after the other is falling to the ground, and suddenly not only the future, but the very present is characterized by uncertainty and instability. How can it be that we now find ourselves expected to take some comfort from Prime Minister May's assurance that there should be no return to the borders of the past? My critical point is that the biggest question we should be asking ourselves now is not how to preserve the integration and cooperation achieved, but rather, why is it that we do not have more? Similar regions in the EU would have far greater comparative levels of integration, cross-border movement, workers and trade. It is clear that the legacy of the hard border lives on. This is a legacy not only of conflict, but of decades of back-to-back development that forged the divergent trajectories of policy making in North and South. In the current absence of information and truth on the future iteration of the border, the worst fears and rumours arise. Recently, in collaboration with Iqbal, I've been running some focus groups in the border region on the topic of Brexit. Unprompted, participants talked a lot about the former border. And I know that's been happening this week, of course, at MacGill. Nobody romanticised it. The scars run deep. There is thus a striking paradox in the experience of the contemporary border, which makes it difficult to explain to the array of outsiders now curious about it. In a way, the border doesn't exist. Most people don't even think about crossing it. Yet at the same time, the border is ever present. It is a lingering strain. One young man in a focus group in Monaghan described it thus: mentally, the border would wear you down. Everyone feels it. And the psychological impact of Brexit in its reawakening of the border is very dangerous. Thinking of Brexit, in order to avoid provoking resentment or unrest in other parts of the EU or indeed within the UK, the flexible and imaginative solutions that are being sought for the Irish border will have to be premised first and foremost on their connection to peace. A focus on such unique circumstances for Northern Ireland means that we are propelled towards the Good Friday Agreement. But in the formal structures of the agreement, we don't have enough to secure deep cooperation. Instead, the most steady and innovative progress has depended first on the capacity of individuals and small organisations, charities and businesses to identify areas of mutual interest, and then on their courage and vision in building upon them. The stark reality facing us now is that we, North and South, have shown far too little interest, far too little capacity, and far too little courage to forge the economic, social, non-political initiatives needed to navigate the uncharted territory of Brexit. The archives of CCBS are full of fantastic reports about opportunities just waiting to be developed North and South. Waiting and waiting. Michael Darcy's 2012 report is an excellent example of this. Titled Opportunities in North-South Public Service Provision, it identified 10 key opportunities to begin cooperative public service projects that would be likely to deliver positive results for citizens across the island within 10 years. These included a joint plan to support economic growth and employment in marginalised communities in both jurisdictions, an all-island single energy market including renewable sources, all-island tourism infrastructure, combining resources of third-level institutions for high-quality courses and knowledge centres. If these had been taken up at the time, we'd already be halfway through to reaping benefits across the island. Instead, we continue to rely upon EU funding, which itself is on occasion vulnerable to the willingness of either government to dedicate the necessary contributions, and there are numerous examples of this. Undeterred, CCBS is still presenting fresh ideas for stimulating and supporting cooperation. One such model is the North-South Social Innovation Network. This was set up just last year by CCBS in collaboration with academic partners and many non-academic partners, including Court and NICFA and Creative Spark. All of these organisations have arrived at a common understanding of the need to develop cross-border cooperation in various sectors: health, education, justice, culture. An inaugural conference took place in November last in Dundalk, and all who attended expressed a desire to move forward on an outcome-oriented basis. Could we imagine a more positive model for planning North-South relations now? Now it's the time for imagination and choices. Do we set out the bottom line and trust that the tug-of-war between Sinn Féin and the DUP, pulling in opposite directions, will create some sort of equilibrium? Tension can be productive after all. But what if the rope of devolution, or of subsidies, or of ceasefires became precariously frayed and both parties end up sprawled on the floor? Alternatively, is it possible to use the spectre of Brexit to focus minds on our mutual interests and to set out what we would all like to see in the future? This has to be more than avoiding a hard border or even preserving what we already have. We can easily lay our hands on a wish list of missed opportunities, untapped connections, underdeveloped ideas to dust off and begin work on. It could be the only means of trying to formalise a fabric of cooperation that has otherwise largely depended on the types of contacts and networks that are all too vulnerable to disruptive forces, be they in the guise of customs controls or paramilitary resurgence. These omissions and aversions have occurred along all three strands of the agreement. Our imaginative solutions must be equally complex and multi-layered. Ultimately, all our visions of the future must converge on our common commitment to peace, not because we are frightened of what paramilitaries may do, but because we recognise that, regardless of what we think of them, we are stuck with the next-door neighbours we have. Cooperation among us is the foundation for peace, ordinary peace, necessary peace. This is a peace that can be destroyed, we know now, not just by violence, but by our own complacency.